So on behalf of the University of Pennsylvania and the schools of education, engineering, nursing, medicine, communications, Wharton, and the Penn Libraries, I want to extend our collective appreciation that you have taken the time to join us for this exceptional 2-day event on MOOCs for development. Many of you are here from the Penn campus and neighborhood, but you are also from more than 25 countries around the world, from major bilateral and multilateral agencies, national governments, the private sector, the nonprofit side, from universities and think tanks to startups and foundations. You are an impressive and incredibly diverse group. It has been our sense that such diversity of representations will give us the opportunity to consider not only the prolific growth of MOOCs and what we should do next. And I ask the question to you all, when did you first hear of the term MOOC? Was it in 2013, 2010, or before? I just want a show of hands, I can barely see you. People heard of MOOCs before 2010? A few hands. By 2013, more hands. So, pretty recently. And it would not be exaggerating to say that this conference is at the cutting edge of a cutting-edge phenomenon. As we have read in the media, MOOCs are growing exponentially, including here at the University of Pennsylvania, and in this country and around the world. And there are claims that MOOCs offer potential, note that word, to democratize education, or as some would say, to reach and serve development at the bottom of the pyramid, those most in need. Hence the title of our meeting today, MOOCs for D. Of course, as a research university, we contemplating calling the conference MOOCs for D, ? What we know about MOOCs is that they are evolving, that the research on effectiveness is slim, but not zero, and findings are sometimes out of date by the time they are published, that the ground is moving literally beneath our feet. Such is life, I think, in the internet age. We can embrace it, but we also need to understand it better and challenge both our hopes for what they will deliver and our claims for what they are delivering. And that, my friends, is what this conference is about. In terms of conference organization, we have sought to respond to multiple needs. First, to be small enough for a good discussion and large enough to include diverse views. Second, to create opportunities to present key findings and plans, and time enough to have an open conversation about them. And third, to provide sufficient breaks around coffee, around lunch, in the program that will allow for networking and private conversation. To achieve this goal, we have a limited number of invited participants. Those are people who have badges and who will be directed to small group discussions by our student staff, those with red stripes on their badges. You've probably seen them already. We also have 4 plenary sessions, including this one, or the one that will just follow this one, that were open to the university more broadly. These will all be in the Ibrahim Auditorium, where we are right now. Again, let me welcome you to an open and challenging set of conversations today and tomorrow. We hope the weather holds and that you can, if you are from out of town, enjoy seeing a bit of Philadelphia. It is now my pleasure to introduce our first university welcomer, Zeke Emanuel, Vice Provost for Global Initiatives at the University of Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Dan. Dan didn't mention that I also have taught 3 MOOCs with some experience out there. So first let me say, MOOCs are a recent phenomenon. More importantly, they are clearly, the online education endeavor is clearly changing higher education. It's raising a number of questions, and the future can only be described as uncertain. No one knows exactly what the impact is going to be on higher education. Worries about the online education cannibalizing regular in-classroom activities, worries about online education creating a few superstars and relegating the rest of the faculty to being glorified TAs, teaching assistants, worries about how the whole thing can be financed. At the moment, it's fair to say no one has a business plan that makes any sense for anything. Ironically, most of it is being financed by professors, universities, and a whole series of other people at a pretty good deficit, but no one knows what that future looks like. There are lots of hyperventilating rhetoric about MOOCs, mostly because it has, until very recently, been a roughly data-free zone, where anyone can say anything. Is kind of like a Rorschach test as to what you think the future is, or what you want the future to be, or how you see the internet shaping the future, and then you just project it onto online education. There are certain things, at least in the first wave of MOOCs, the last couple of years, that we do know. On the Coursera platform and others, roughly a third of the people come from the United States, a third of the people come from other developed countries, and a third of the people come from developing countries. And so that you do have some sense that there's diversity. It turns out that within the developing countries, broadly speaking, and within all countries, India is number 2, interestingly, and China is, fair to say, nowhere to be found. Very few people taking it. I think we've had a lot of talk and projection about how MOOCs are going to democratize education. MOOCs are going to bring the greatest educators from around the world to small rural villages, to people who would otherwise never be able to see them. And again, most of this is, I think, projection. The preliminary data we have, and there's, I think, growing data, suggests that that's, at least now, not likely to be the case. There are, I think, once you step back and think about it, all sorts of barriers on MOOCs actually being this great democratizing force. First of all, at least in a preliminary way, you gotta know English. Well, that limits the number of people right away. Second, you have to have broadband internet that works at least reasonably well, which also requires electricity. That further limits the reach. Third, you have to have reading, and if you're taking college level MOOCs, there's a huge amount of prior training and education that you need to make sense of what you can absorb there. Given all of that, I think what we have to worry about MOOCs is that they're going to exacerbate inequality. I think, for me, that has to be the single biggest issue. They may end up with this very strange phenomenon. It actually looks like what's happening, at least at the first early development stage, is they equalize the opportunities between the elites around the world. So if you're an elite in India and you're an elite in the United States, you can get access to the same platform, the same education, the same information. On the other hand, if you're from a small village in India, the opportunities are going to be much less that you're going to actually use this. And within your country, compared to the elite who now get access to the best of the world, you are going to be left further and further behind. I think this narrow the inequality among the elites of countries and widen the inequality within poorer countries is the phenomena that we have to be most concerned about, and that we really need to think through as we go forward, because that will be, I think, would be a terrible outcome of MOOCs, exacerbating inequality in the developing countries. If we're interested in helping the bottom get equality and opportunities which hitherto they haven't had because of geography and other expense barriers, having MOOCs may turn out not to be an answer at all, and we would have to think much harder. I think that's one set of problems. The other set of problems that Dan alluded to is, how good are these? What are they actually doing? Are they providing people college education? Are they providing people further additional training? Are they just allowing people to brush up? We do know, we don't know much about people's intention when they take. We don't know how much completing a course is necessary to people, whether they come on just for a particular item and go off. We do know that keeping people engaged, keeping them going on a course for the whole entire course is hard work. It's not going to happen just by throwing it up there. And again, whether this can be used for massive higher education, I think, is going to be one of our big challenges, or whether this is some other continuing education format, I think is another thing we really don't know. I would say that, therefore, the two big challenges that we have trying to project just even a few years into the future in this very uncertain, very murky world are, how can we do more to ensure that the value of online education gets to the bottom third? Not the people who are elites, and just looking at people from developing countries doesn't help, but the actual people who are in the bottom third. And I think the second thing is, how can we be sure that what's being provided is actually educational, that it is enlightening people and raising people's, can be for their just general enlightenment, can be for employment, can be to increase technical skills. But I think we have very little understanding of that process and how we need to adapt our MOOCs to that. I say all of this with the knowledge that on Saturday, I am refilming my next MOOC and spending a lot of time thinking about how to improve what I do in the online platform. Most of what I work on is health policy, and American health policy at that. And I will tell you, one of the primary obsessions I have now is to make what we're doing very high production quality so that it can compete with television, high-end television that's actually educational. And to try to understand how people who've grown up on television can learn using this. Shorter times, more visuals, more analogies. That actually is hard work. It takes a lot of thinking. It's not like lecturing in a classroom. It is much more, each session is much more, I think, has to be reconceived. It's not much more, just a different kind of format. And that requires time, financial resources, high quality video production, while the prices come down substantially, is still not free. All of that poses challenges for how this is going to go forward and how ultimately it's going to be paid for. Early on, lots of people are going to try these things like myself and fund them, but to sustain this entire endeavor is going to require a business model. And that's the third thing. We have no idea about how it's going to work. It's not going to work as it is today with no business model. I think those are going to be some of the challenges that confront you through the day, and I hope that this thinking is just the start, because this uncertainty we have, I think, is going to persist for a number of years until we get a sort of stable ecosystem around online education. And I think no one really can see that far into the future, and that's a very good reason to revisit the kinds of questions that you're going to begin addressing today periodically and over time as the waters clear here and we have a better view of how MOOCs fit into the entire education landscape. So with that, I want to thank you for coming, and I hope that this turns out to be a very productive program for you. Thank you.
Graduate School of Education.
Good morning. Thank you, Dan. Actually, we all owe Dan a big thank you. The idea for this meeting is Dan's. It's his vision, his creativity. And I'm very fortunate to have him on our faculty in the Graduate School of Education. Thank you for being here. I think it's a very exciting time. But being here and sitting down there listening to Zeke reminded me of a conversation I had with my father, who was born in 1904 and is now passed on. I said, Dad, look at all the change that you've seen over your lifetime. So many wonderful and exciting discoveries and inventions and improvements. And of course, you can see I've got a few years on me now, and I'm looking back, and I'm kind of wondering whether my dad lived in the most exciting and fast-moving time, or maybe I am. And certainly, MOOCs is a part of that. So for me, I really hadn't heard anything about MOOCs until about a year and a half or two ago. And I'm happy to be here at this great University of Pennsylvania because it's one of the leading institutions of higher education, as you know, in terms of using MOOCs. Let me just make sure I say a couple things. Zeke brings up the question, we have this cliche, at least in the States, the rich get richer, and will that happen through MOOCs as well? We're very interested in the School of Education here, and in K-12 education, but before higher education. And almost all of the developments that happen that improve student learning dramatically tend to exacerbate the inequalities between those who are learning at the fastest pace and those that are learning at the slowest pace. And will MOOCs be like that? I think Zeke said that that's a possibility, but I think it's for you and for me a challenge. How can we work to make sure that MOOCs are also a force for reducing the great inequalities that we have both in the United States and across the world? And we're going to be working hard to push in that direction. Also, because we're on the very beginnings of MOOCs, and we have a responsibility to have a integrated research agenda with that. And that's a challenge that I hope that you will address going forward as well. You know, some of the barriers that Zeke identified in terms of access to MOOCs and the like, I think they're important and they're true for this moment, but they don't need to be true. Does a MOOC have to be delivered in the English language? No. Obviously it doesn't. Does a MOOC have to be delivered in a way that requires good reading skills? No, that's not true. And in fact, I would say that MOOCs are just a specific aspect of a much larger phenomenon that's been around for a very long time, distance education. But distance education is, I think, about to realize some of its long unrealized potential. We in the School of Education want to have a big impact, obviously, and we're a very tiny school, only 34 standing faculty, so we have to have very highly leveraged strategies for pursuing our mission, and one is to be the place with the ideas. So we want to provide leadership in what is excellent online teaching, not just in MOOCs, but in other areas. One of the things we have in the United States, for those of you who are not here, is virtual schools. And these are schools that give students an opportunity that they otherwise wouldn't have had. Can we learn how to, we've just created the first ever, to our knowledge, program to train teachers to teach online and to do it online. We call it online teacher education. So I'm very pleased that Dan had the foresight wisdom to convene a group like this from all over the world. And I'm very glad that you're here. I'm happy to welcome you, and I wish you a productive couple days.
Our next and final welcome is from Kostas Danielidis, Associate Dean of the School of Engineering and Applied Science.
On behalf of the Applied Engineering faculty and community, I welcome all of you to Penn. It is one of the very rare times that we attract not only a global, but also such a multidisciplinary community to Penn. And I would like to thank Dan Wagner and Joe Sun from engineering and all the organizers who made this possible. So the University of Pennsylvania has been one of the very early endorsers of MOOC. This is probably during my 15 years or 16 years here, one of the best decisions I have ever seen at the university level. Penn has already offered, I think, 34 courses and continues to be a very active provider. But as Zeke and Andy before mentioned, as MOOCs continue to grow in number and in quality, and having the M in the MOOCs, the massive, everybody thinks about how to make the most impact to reach learners at all levels and all over the world. And this includes obviously the bottom 1/3, the ones without access either to technology or even to traditional forms of learning. In engineering, we are very well aware of this gap. It appeared before as a digital gap. We try to have more of an activist role in this. We have partnerships with local and multinational entities, like the Engineers Without Borders. Over the past 15 years, we have been involved in projects in many countries in the developing world, both at the technology level as well as at the education level. So we are very aware of this gap, not only at the international level, but also next to us. I mean, we are next to the Philadelphia School District, inside the Philadelphia School District. For years, as a roboticist, as a director of the GRASP laboratory, the robotics lab, we have been mentoring schools from the Philadelphia School District, trying to get at least one of them to rank in the best 5 of the robotics competitions from the first foundation at any level. We have not been successful yet, but this is really our dream, that we take kids from the very struggling schools and we make them top roboticists, and so that they become also later top engineers. One of our professors' courses, Rob Greist's Calculus, which has been one of the most popular MOOCs, is now offered to a group of 10 high schools in the area, with amazing involvement of the teachers and the students. In robotics and mechatronics, we work on a book, not really massive, but an open online course for students from the Philadelphia inner city high schools as a summer enrichment program. I have worked with many top PhD students, mainly brain drains from the developing world. But we have worked also with many struggling students from in all levels from K to 12 with these mentoring activities. And I must say that the most impact, if MOOCs are going to have an impact for the bottom 1/3, will be really at this level, at elementary, middle, and high school. And in engineering, really in everything related to STEM. So I'm really very much looking forward to receive the collective wisdom from non-engineers, also from education people here. And I really appreciate that the School of Education really took this initiative. And we look forward to identifying several opportunities and strategies and really learn, that we engineers learn how to do this. And this is one of the times, like the start of MOOCs here at Penn, that we are really very pleased to be co-sponsors of this event together with the School of Education. And I hope you enjoy your time in Philadelphia and have a very warm welcome.
So, thank you for those welcomes, and I need to say also that there are many people who participated in getting this conference going. The complete list is on the back of your program. Rather than take time, I didn't list it all out now, but you'll be glad to see that multiple schools and many individuals played key roles in this. We'll have something more to say about that at the end, but we didn't want to take time for this morning. So this morning, we're going to go right into the next session, which is chaired by Joseph's son, who is chair of the conference from the School of Engineering. And the speakers are, who can come up now, are Abdul Waheed Khan, Bakary Diallo, and Michele Petochi. Petochi, good Italian pronunciation. And this session is the Advent of MOOCs, a topic that already has begun to be raised by some of the introducers and welcomers this morning.
Thank you for your patience. We don't really have a stage crew, but move things around as we go along. Just to add one word of welcome from me to all who are gathered here together. It's a great honor and a privilege for me to be participating in this very impressive gathering. Of scholars and practitioners and policymakers, decision makers around the uses of ICT within the context of development. And I am also very much looking forward to learn a great deal from all of the conversations that will be taking place during the next 2 days. I'm wondering if the first speaker is ready for this with the slides. So, is the AV ready to go? Okay, so in the interest of saving time, I will not, as the moderator of this session, read the presentation abstracts. They're all printed in the vanilla colored document that you received as you registered. And also the bio sketches of all of our esteemed presenters are also printed and available for you in, I believe it's a green handout that you picked up, right? So for this very first plenary on the topic of the Advent of MOOCs, we are very honored and privileged to have with us a panel of 3 very distinguished individuals. And I will just say their names in the order in which they will be making their 10-minute presentation. First is Professor Abdul Waheed Khan, who was previously Vice Chancellor of the Indira Gandhi National Open University, one of the largest universities in the world. He will be followed by Professor Bakary Diallo, who is currently the rector of the African Virtual University, also with equally impressive large numbers of enrollment, delivering enormous impact to the well-being of many, many individuals who are enrolled in the education that the African Virtual University offers. And then the third and final speaker is Professor Michele Petochi. He is here from the Ecole, Polytechnique, Federale de Lausanne, EPFL in Switzerland, and has responsibilities, a wide range of responsibilities, one of which is focused on directing the integration of research, education, visualization, and outreach, and tech transfer. So, in the interest of time, I am now going to turn the microphone, the PA system, as it were, over to our very first speaker, Professor Abdul Waheed Khan.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's a great honor and privilege for me to be invited to speak at this conference. As Professor Dan Wagner said, this is the first MOOCs conference on its implications for development. And I'm really very privileged to be here. I'd like to begin by thanking Professor Wagner for inviting me to this conference. We have been a friend of very long standing. If I give you the number of years, probably that you will guess our age, so I'll not do that. I do not want to embarrass him. But we go back many, many years ago. Especially we met quite frequently when I was at UNESCO, heading Communication Information Technology sector there. As you know, the International Literacy Institute was jointly established by the University of Pennsylvania and UNESCO in 1994, and he's currently the chair of literacy and learning because of his outstanding contribution to this field. It is a very well-deserved honor, and I am very pleased to call him a friend, honored to call him a friend indeed. Now, MOOCs has been, as you've heard this morning, and I'm sure you've read a lot about it, is perhaps the most recent phenomenon in education. It's a buzzword. It has been called a game changer, a disruptive technology, a radical technology, a revolutionary technology. Some people call it even a tsunami. I don't know if that is positive or negative. Others have called it a gold rush because of some efforts to develop for-profit models and so on. But the critics also call it a fad, a hype, an attempt at cultural imperialism, and many other criticisms that I believe any new innovation encounters. Nothing particular about MOOCs. There are always those who get onto the bandwagon pretty early. There are others who are very critical of new innovations. But particularly, I'd like to mention my personal bias. I believe innovations have positive contributions to make in every society. And MOOCs as an innovation has a contribution to make. Having said that, there are, of course, reasons to be careful, to think of models that may benefit the marginalized groups and communities and so on. But MOOCs is essentially a response to the emerging knowledge societies. This is a concept that UNESCO introduced at the time of the discussion of the World Summit on Information Society, that the phenomena that we are witnessing today is an emergence of, as the societies move or make a transition from agricultural society to industrial society to knowledge societies, the value of knowledge increases. There's nothing, so great in stating that. It's a fact that today knowledge is a premium. It is, in fact, knowledge has always been a premium. It has been a source of wealth and power since ancient times. And in fact, in Indian mythology, we have two goddesses, the goddess of Lakshmi, that is the goddess of wealth, and the goddess of goddess Saraswati, the goddess of knowledge. As you can imagine, more people worship goddess Lakshmi, who doesn't want wealth. But there were very few who worshipped or followed Goddess Saraswati. In fact, knowledge was the preserve of few. It was an exclusive domain for privileged few. It's no longer the case. It is in the 21st century that Goddess Saraswati has caught up with Goddess Lakshmi. In fact, Goddess Saraswati is now the primary source of knowledge and wealth. And in this century, it is the Goddess Saraswati is also aided by most powerful tools, high-speed connectivity, of policies for open educational resources, and also the support of some of the brightest minds in the world who are now involved in developing and promoting MOOCs. May I now turn to my own personal experience of MOOCs of a very different kind, a poor man's version of MOOCs. And let me spell that. Massive, of course, it is a common, nobody has defined what massive means. I've seen figures of 2,000 people registered being called massive. But there are, of course, 160,000 and above, those who have been registered. Then the second one is open. This is a relatively new phenomenon. The third one is online. Now this is where I deviate. My experiment with MOOCs some 35 years ago, nobody had heard of MOOCs at that time, of course, was on air, not online, on air, and courses in agriculture for farmers. I'm myself from a village. I was trained to be an agriculture scientist. I went on to study communications and so on. But it's a long story, but I found myself in a program that was developed to support India's grain revolution. And there were three components in that program: farm broadcasting, functional literacy, and farmers training. And I had the privilege of heading the farm broadcasting component of that program. Now, India was faced with a massive shortage of food in early 70s, and India took several steps of establishing a large number of agricultural universities. Now there are 29 of them. I had established a large number of research centers and also extension machinery covering the whole country. There was still a large gap between the knowledge being generated by the research centers and the practice at the farmer's field, gap between the land and the lab. So we decided to launch a program from the only broadcaster at that time in the country was the public service broadcaster, All India Radio and Doordarshan, which is television. And I spent a few years in an agriculture university creating an agriculture communication center. So my idea was to convert what we were communicating to farmers into a course, go to an agriculture university and seek the support of the Department of Agriculture and agro-industries, agriculture research centers, and jointly develop a program called Farm School on the Air. This Farm School on the Air, the first one is the one that I will talk about, was introduced in 1977 from Bangalore station in Karnataka in India. And it registered some 16,000 farmers and farm women. The course was on paddy cultivation. It would start with three broadcasts, 15 minutes per day, 3 days a week, with a farmer, an extension worker, and a scientist participating in it. The agriculture university in Karnataka prepared the printed lessons. The farmers training centers, 30 of them, served as hands-on practical training centers for the farmers. And agro-industry contributed a huge sum of money for giving prizes to the successful listeners of that program. That included improved breeds of cows, and heifers, and poultry, and utensils, and saris, and bicycles, and radios, and you name it, fertilizers, insecticides, seed bags, and so on and so forth. Anyway, the program ran for a period of 4 months. The point that I want to make really is that it attracted the attention of the national leaders, of the agriculture research leaders, of agriculture universities, of agro-industries, and everyone else, that you can indeed put together a package and present it in a multimedia format. At that time, there was no multimedia of the kind that we know today. It was multiple media, radio, printed material, and hands-on, what we call learner support system today in open and distance learning. And the program has now been running for over 35 years. From all these stations of the public service broadcasters have been running this program for over 30 years. Millions of farmers have graduated from these schools now. What is now the departure? What is the difference? Why was it effective? Number one, that it tackled a local issue. Rice was the main crop. The lesson from Bangalore station was on rice cultivation. It was broadcast in the local language. It was a multi-stakeholder partnership. It has incentives for the listeners or those who participated. It had an element of hands-on practical experience of what we call blended learning today, and so on and so forth. So these are the elements that made this program, although I'm sorry if those who are into MOOCs today, they would even consider that this would qualify to be MOOCs. But the point is not what you call an educational effort. The point is, it is not the technology that should determine learning, it is the learning that should determine what technology you have to use. Is the technology really appropriate? Is the language of broadcasting, as we heard this morning, that English language could be a barrier? It need not be. I agree with the observation of the Dean School of Education, that it need not be. There are many efforts being made now in Bangladesh. There is a very cheap version of MOOCs being run in Bangla language. In India, there is an effort to run MOOCs in Hindi language. I think it will happen. When the UK Open University was established in 1979, at that time, there were many who did not believe in the philosophy of open and distance learning. I ended up running a university which now has a student population of 4.2 million. We started with an enrollment of 5,000. The point is that you can't, you don't want to put a barrier against the potential of a technology. Yes, I'm not saying that you blindly follow, but I personally believe that the new technologies, the proliferation of new communication information technologies, their ability to make education mobile, make it relevant to the needs of the people, take the information and knowledge in the language of the people that they can understand, provide learner support systems so that they can try things and try hands-on practical experience. If there are incentives, even better. These are the factors that really contribute to the success of programs that are aimed at promoting or taking innovations to the so-called the bottom of the pyramid people. Now, very quickly, my personal involvement in running this large university, you are all often asked question, how can you have 4.2 million students in a single university? Even to those of us who were founder members of that university, frankly, it is, even in our wildest dreams, we could not imagine that one day we will have 4 million students on our rolls. What made it possible? I think basically because there was a massive unmet demand for higher education in the country. Even qualified students were not getting seats in the existing conventional universities and colleges. First. The second, that we developed a fairly modern approach to program, that is academic program development and offerings, involved much larger stakeholders. For example, I mean, the total number of staff in the university was not more than 3,000. However, the total number of people who were working for the university was close to 27,000. The remaining, that is 24,000, were drawn from every possible field if they represented a field of specialization and knowledge. So that was tapping into the talent, academic and academic labor that was available, and some of the best and brightest minds who contributed to development of the program. The second, that we began to produce academic programs, tailor-made academic programs for the needs of industry. Construction industry, chemical industry, leather industry, auto industry, you name it. We went to them and said, you help us develop the curriculum that will meet your need. Basically, that one of the main criticisms of higher education today is that we do not produce graduates who are employable. And we are producing large number of graduates, particularly in my country, and they are largely unemployable. But if you produce programs like the corporate university is doing to meet specific needs of the learner for a specific industry, then perhaps they will have a better chance of meeting those needs. The third element was that we actually encouraged active partnership between private and public sector. We did not have, for example, we now have 3,500 learning centers. None of them have been built by the university. In fact, there is a healthy competition for organizations, existing colleges and universities, to become our learning centers. They provide the physical facilities. Yes, we help them build their library, build their labs, train their faculty, provide audiovisual facilities and so on. But we have not built, imagine 3,500 learning centers. If you simply multiply that with any figure, it's a mind-boggling figure how many millions of dollars you would have to spend. So there are ways and means that you can. Now through these two examples, what I'm trying to convey is that technology can bring a multiplier effect to the challenges in education of access, of quality, of cost, of relevance, of addressing the question of equity that was talked about. So it is possible for technology to address, but the technology per se is not the panacea. You have to use the technology, contextualize it, make it relevant, make it appropriate, address the local issues in the local language if possible. I think that will make a difference. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for those very enlightening remarks. Our next panelist to speak is Professor Bakary Diallo. And before you begin, I guess I just need to say that I have this very unfortunate task of trying to keep us on time. So I will try to provide a 1-minute time check for each of the remaining speakers. Our goal will be to try to preserve the last 30 minutes for the question and answer session.
Yeah, I'm just trying to
Bring up the projection. Who has the password? Look under your seats. There's a large reward for anyone with a password. All right. We have Lauren to thank. The next 10 minutes of the session now is for Professor Diallo.
Thank you very much. Usually I would like to stand when I speak because it's very hard for me to be sitting and speak. Good morning, everyone. I would like to thank Professor Dan for inviting me to be part of this very special group that is reflecting on MOOCs. I would like also to thank some of my colleagues and partners I've met here. And I will just name a few of them. Mr. Aj from Invitational de Dakar. We are currently working on a partnership to deliver a program on renewable energy, certificate in renewable energy with this institution. We have ICDE, at University, and many other universities that are here today. Briefly, I would like to present the title of my presentation, which is Pragmatism Before Popularity, AVU, which stands for African Virtual University. Approach to MOOCs. We learned about MOOCs about 3 years ago, and we were very ill prepared. Like the first or the second speaker told us today, it's hard to make a decision on MOOCs when you do not know what the future is. So either you stand and do your MOOCs, or you just wait and try to have a strategy. So we did not have the money to put in MOOCs, so we decided to go for the second one, which was to study what we need to do with MOOCs. My presentation, I have a lot of slides, but I will try to take 12 minutes, and those who are interested can read more about my presentation. I will talk about the AVU, the context of higher education in Africa, and MOOCs, because MOOCs make sense for us in the context of higher education in Africa. What can we do to solve existing problems? Briefly about the African Virtual University, probably some of you know more than me about the AVU. It was created 15 years ago as a World Bank project, and my colleague just talked about ODL. At AVU, we include e-learning and ODL, which became open distance and e-learning. That was adopted in 2003. And we have a memorandum of understanding with the African Union Commission, which is like the equivalent of the European Commission. We don't have that in this part of the world. Briefly, AVU, we have 19 countries as members of AVU, and these 19 countries have signed our charter. We work across 30 African countries. Our mandate is to increase access to quality higher education and training through the innovative use of ICT. So we are trying to see how we can use ICT to leverage, to improve pedagogy, but mostly also to increase access. And MOOCs really present a big potential for this. I will go through some of slides very quickly. Since we are Pan-African and work across 3 main languages, French, English, and Portuguese, we have currently 3 offices, two in Nairobi, where I'm located, and one in Dakar, Senegal, which work mainly with the French-speaking countries. These are the countries we're working with in Africa. As you can see, blue represent French countries, yellow English, green is for Portuguese-speaking, and red Arabic. Briefly, the context of higher education. The biggest problem in Africa is access. Only 6% of school leavers have access to higher education. I'm not saying graduating, this is the average in sub-Saharan Africa. And we also know that from our research, it takes about 12 to 15% of graduates in any country to sustain economic development. So we can see that we have a huge gap in here. And currently, universities are not able to just face the demand. And we believe that open distance and e-learning is really a solution to these problems. We do have challenges in Africa. When someone was talking this morning about high quality books, it's in the context of North America, it makes sense, but in the context of Africa, it will take ages to download it if you can't download it at all. For instance, we have other challenges, and my slides will be available for you to read it. Because of time, I will just go very quickly. But we do have also opportunities, and my guess is that we should be focusing more on the opportunities. The opportunities is like fiber optics penetration in Africa is improving, use of alternative sources of power, the emergence of mobile technology. This is like a blessing, a shortcut, where we do not need to invest heavily in infrastructure, but yet be able to access internet, to access other resources. But I think what is really important is to know that e-learning is a viable and profitable business in Africa. It's growing, so which means that it works. Quickly, just this is the way fiber optics is penetrating in Africa, and every year, every day is getting better. So the environment is in the future is bright in this term. At AV, what do? We are basically 75% of our activities is based on capacity building of state members and partner institutions. We have about 60 partner institutions in Africa working with that, and we help in developing the capacity to do distance and e-learning specifically. And these are some of the activities we do. We do have offers certificate, diploma programs, degree programs, but these are really underdeveloped, and we are working on. I'll talk about this later on, how we can improve this. Quickly also, the ABU Multinational Project 1, 2005-2010. I'm mentioning this program, this project, because we developed through this program 219 textbooks and 100 videos that are released as open educational resources. So we are very strong on open educational resources today. And as you can see from yourself, one of the biggest outcome of this project up to now is the training of unqualified teachers in Senegal. We call them in French les contracteurs. We started this program, and the government comes in, and today we have about 13,000 that have been trained. This is a sample of Open Distance and E-Learning Center in Africa, where he talked about infrastructure if you want to do open distance and e-learning. So we raise funds and help install these kind of centers in many countries, in many universities. We are currently installing about 27 of these centers in Africa. Open educational resources. I will take just a couple of minutes because this is linked to MOOCs, where I would like to spend most of my presentation. We still believe that open educational resources can help to increase access to higher education. We are talking about business models, but the fact that these resources are open to anyone in the world make a big difference. The question is, how do we capitalize on this in countries, in the continent like Africa? We are focused at ABU on math, science, and teacher education, and ICT in education. Our open education resources are recognized here in the United States. Actually, we won 3 international awards here. And if you know Merlot or other repositories, they are using actually our resources, which are developed by Africans from Africa. And we are currently also doing what we call a multinational project, which is to upscale our capacity building activities, and we'll be developing more resources, open educational resources in math and science. Innovation in educational technologies through research and development. I think this is one of the most important activities of the ABU now, in the sense that, for instance, when MOOCs started 2-3 years ago, we didn't know what to do, and we didn't have the capacity to plan for it. So we have been actually reacting, trying to see what we can do for that. So we created this center this year, and the function of the center is to spearhead R&D in educational technologies and educational innovation. We also are going to have a mobile learning laboratory, and we are organizing international conferences like this one, and also we'll be launching a open journal. MOOCs. Well, this is very interesting, because if you look at the numbers I provided earlier regarding access to higher education in Africa, you would say that MOOCs is the ideal solution to this, because you can enroll thousands of learners at the same time. But realistically, how are we going to do this? At ABU, we took time, about a couple of years, to study what we want to do, and we believe that we have to build on our open education resources. And ABU is also seen as one of the organizations that can spearhead MOOCs across the continent, because we have a larger reach. The MOOC concept is appealing and has a great potential to Africa. However, there are challenges that some of the speakers mentioned this morning. Attrition rates, access from Africa, because these are very heavy, most of the time very heavy videos, and it's very hard to download them or to even connect to the internet at some places in Africa. The other problem is, I believe, is accreditation, because we do need courses, but we need more programs. If you have only 6% of school leavers attending university, and you want to go to 15% to 20%, you don't focus on courses, but you rather focus on programs. And that's why I think that perhaps we should be talking or thinking about MOOCs, not MOOCs, in terms of programs and not courses. So this is a concept we are actually looking into at ABU. The rationale for our MOOCs at ABU, what do you want to do? Basically, we want to see how we can leverage our experience in working with multi-partners in multi-countries and multi-languages in Africa. And in our current business plan, 2014-2019, we have included the MOOCs. And we are looking at how can we accredit it? Because if there is no accreditation, I don't think that it will make sense for us. Perhaps we can look at professional development. We can look at providing some skills. But if you get to the business of training graduates, you have to have a system of accreditation. We are thinking about something like mini MOOCs, where we have more enrollment than we have currently with a possible accreditation. But accreditation is important. Well, a few objectives for us to move with MOOCs. One of them is to forge institutional partnerships. Already I've been talking with lot of partners, and perhaps I'll be talking with Ben today. I think that you are very strong in MOOCs. I have discussion with Daphne Flora from Coursera. I've been also talking to an initiative called, I think, Open MOOC or something from the Europeans. So we are looking at a global partnership to see what we can do to help. Finally, we think that one of the first step for us is to develop an infrastructure that is adapted to the African context. When I was talking to some of the MOOC providers, and their MOOC are available, but how to, first of all, access is a problem. Second of all, sometimes you need to conceptualize the context. At ABU, we have a large experience of brokering content. That's how ABU started, brokering content. It wasn't called MOOCs then. They used to broadcast, but it was the same concept. Broadcasting content to Africa and enrolling the masses. But it didn't work out. First of all, it didn't work out because the content was not conceptualized. Program was designed in the US, in Canada, and so on. It just delivered to a context. I think we have a lot of educationalists here. When you develop or you do your course, you prepare it according to a philosophy, according to a context. If your course and program doesn't address the context of Africa, so on, if it is for instance, in computer science, it's okay, perhaps, but in other subjects, it might become a problem. So we believe that developing an adequate infrastructure to support the development of delivery of MOOC is important. The other step we are doing now, maybe we are lagging behind, but we think that we're doing it the best we can, is to launch 2 MOOCs as proof of concept. One will be on ODLPD, Open Distance and E-Learning Professional Development. I think that this university is doing something similar with teacher education. We've been doing that since 2008, and now we would like to offer it as a MOOC. And the other will be on peace management and conflict resolution. The other thing is we need to mobilize resources and mainstream MOOCs in ABU programs. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Dr. Diallo, thank you for those insightful comments. As we make the transition to our third and final speaker, I would just comment that I very much appreciated the two items in your remarks. One is introducing a new acronym for us, which is MOOC. So thank you for introducing the new term of MOOC to us. That is to move from courses to programs, and the use of that kind of an acronym. And as not quite right here. And as it has been remarked by previous speakers, there's this overriding importance to recognize the local context so that whatever is done is made very relevant to the local context. And I very much appreciate this idea of a peace management and conflict resolution strategy, and leveraging the uses of ICT for development, uses of MOOCs in particular in this case, the idea of using MOOCs as a means to help advance the training and development needs around how to best manage conflict and to promote a more lasting peace. And this is a kind of a platform that actually is perfect for that, because it can cross all sorts of geographical boundaries and bring together knowledge and experience and practice from many, many corners of the world where these are very important and crucial topics for the well-being of civil society. So thank you very much for those remarks. And now I think we're ready for Professor Petochi. No sound. Is there a switch? There.
Oh, thank you for calling me professor. I'm not a professor. I only have a master, but I'm flattered by that. So my name is Michele. I'm from the Ecole Polytechnique Federale de Lausanne, and I would like to share with you a warm greeting from our president, Bakary, who was supposed to join us here today, but for institutional priorities he had to cancel this visit, but he's really a great advocate of the role of technology in education and capacity building in developing countries. Joe, I'll try to be brief, so we welcome questions. So the title of this session is the Advent of the MOOCs, which I would rename the length of the user, also because we are in April, and because it's interesting to look at MOOCs in a sort of a length phase, not much the advent and peak phase. So if you use these diagrams, which are usually utilized to show the adoption of new technologies, this can apply quite well to what's happened with MOOCs. It is actually fascinating that some of the experiences, even many years ago, as Professor Khan was mentioning, were very instrumental actually to where we are now in online education, but they were either isolated or not so much known, and more importantly, they were, they didn't have the exposure that education now has as a consequence of the boom of the MOOCs, and that goes well beyond what an online course is. It's education is now on the radar. It was equally important until 2 years ago, but now it's on everybody's agenda, including professors who are now passionate about it. When it comes to access to broader audiences, what the future holds, well, we don't know. It's a good discussion. There will be multiple forms. There will be different blends. There will be different needs fulfilled for different users. But these are still open questions. Just a quick, this slide is from a group of students from the Graduate Institute in Geneva who studied the impact of MOOCs in some of their countries, primarily Mexico and Thailand. And actually, if you see, there are some views, but the neutral column is still quite significant. So many people might find it more or less interesting, but they just don't know what this will bear. However, the threshold has been passed, so the outlook for the MOOCs is that they are here to stay. What will be interesting to see in the future is what kind of interesting offering will be available, what technology, data, visualization will allow, both in terms of reducing the cost of productions, which are supposed to become more and more interesting, and also in terms of what is fascinating in terms of visualizations for education. I mean, as I'm sure you all know, the quality and resolution of certain visualizations that can be used for education is really amazing, and it's amazing for students, no matter from where and no matter from what context. The advantage of the academia, as it thinks of helping the bottom of the pyramid, is probably in the notion of benchmark. The benchmark for academia and education and science is a benchmark which is similar to a benchmark in sports. So there is not a bad academia and a good academia. There is a benchmark that we know, And then there are context-specific policies and changes that have to be applied. But it's if this is a time for testing new projects, new partnerships, the universities themselves as organizations are very well positioned because they can test a lot. What is also important to mention is that the employers are more and more interested in outcomes of online education, as it also emerges from surveys in the last few years from organizations like the World Economic Forum, where I used to work, and others. So the topic of education, because of this boom of online education, is much more prominently on the agenda. What I tried to do here, and I'm not going to go in detail, but what I want to emphasize is that this is about people, it's about individuals. And if you break it down by some of the dimensions of MOOCs and some of the individuals who are involved in MOOCs in different ways, either as learners or teachers or beneficiaries, and I'm using some arbitrary and some more obvious categories, it shows you the degree of diversity that you have to keep in mind at the moment you create an offering in the space of online education. It's fascinating. Some elements are more relevant to some users, some are less relevant, but the more you think about it, the more you get granular into who is in need of what in this whole space. And very importantly, the user is not like me, the user is not like you, it is the user. So what you think is good for the user maybe is not necessarily the case. So the question is, how do we serve people in resource-poor communities across the world? I guess this is a question that we bring with us throughout this conference, and how to serve every individual and group and in the right way. I don't think we will answer these questions within a couple of days, but the focus on the individual, the focus on the user is really what should drive any experiment or larger project. Joe, how much time do we have? 5? Okay, I've got a little more granular here. So these are areas of challenge, we have to say, but because I guess that everybody in this room is enthusiastic and passionate and has invested a lot of time in this area, we probably all like to see them as opportunities. So one area of opportunity is dissemination. There will be innovative solutions for access to bandwidth. By bandwidth, I mean bandwidth itself, but also all the aspects of software and hardware that will have to become available. But that doesn't seem impossible. I will also show you something afterwards. Language is key. It came out very clearly also from the presentations of my colleagues on the panel. And the blend is equally key. So bandwidth, which goes to the broader area of technology, language, and blend. These are not all the elements, but probably 3 of the key ingredients to be taken into account. So for example, what we're doing in Switzerland, and it's not to market EPFL, but there are so many interesting things happening at EPFL, which I joined just a few months ago. One of the recent things they launched is a competition for flying donkeys, which are basically cargo drones that are supposed to deliver important and not very heavy goods from one to another area in zones of the continent in Africa where either roads are too difficult or during rain season it is not possible to deliver. So I'm not gonna tell you much more about this, but this is just an example of so things are happening in technology which might still sound a little dreamy, but they will happen at some point, and they will improve access. Second area of opportunity, academic environment. Governance governance is key. It touches on students, it touches on professors, because it really boils down to allocation of time of students and professors, no matter if in the US or in a country in the developing world. I think it's important to allow to test rather than being obsessed with the regulatory environment, which will never be clear, because this is something new, and so it is rather about testing than about policies or rules which are impossible to articulate. And obviously it is important that all the partnerships are very diverse and really include anyone, any entity that can contribute. Otherwise you don't learn. Content development, both foundation courses and courses developed in areas of priority are important. And two important things. One, I think Professor Emmanuel mentioned it earlier this morning, students have to have enough basis to be able to benefit from some of these courses, and the teacher is at the center of everything here. It's important also to harness networks back to partnerships and to sharing best practices. This is just one example which I use from the Francophone network, which covers about 500 million people in the Francophone world, to which EPFL belongs, as it is from the French-speaking regional area of Switzerland. And again, there are a lot of interesting projects, including but not limited to online education, and this is just one example of many partnerships that will help advance education and research, including on MOOCs, but much more broadly on the educational and research offering. I will stop here. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Michele. So in the interest of time, there are a couple of student coordinators who I believe will have mobile microphones available to bring to you. So we're going to devote the remainder of our time together, about a little less than 20 minutes, to give you the opportunity to pose questions that may have come up for you as you listen to our three panelists for this plenary. No question is taboo, or too small, or too large. Thank you.
I'm Waheed from East China Normal University. My question is to Professor Bakary Diallo. You mentioned several times the importance of accreditation of courses. This is a course level accreditation. So I'm wondering if you can elaborate more of your ideas. So for example, you are asking for an international institution of course level accreditation, or regional like Africa, or you actually think that there should also be a network of national accreditation agencies for courses. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will just reply by telling you what we are doing currently. On May 15, we're going to have a quality assurance, for instance, workshop in Nairobi, Kenya, where I live, organized by the African Virtual University, and we are inviting 21 national regulatory bodies to come to this workshop, because we believe that accreditation is important, and we are looking into a national accreditation, but also cross-border accreditation. Last year, around May, we met with the same group, but in the case of Africa, what we are looking into is that if ABU and a partner institution deliver a program, that program be recognized within that country with the national regulatory body. Since we can have programs that will be broadcast in several countries, we need to work with all these nations together to see what is acceptable for them, what are the minimum standards that are acceptable to each country, so that we take this into account when we are designing the program, we are developing the programs. Right, thank you.
May I just add to that question and perhaps to solicit a further response? And that is that currently in African Virtual University, there already are accredited programs that are recognized by the accreditation organizations. And so I just wonder how an online program, a virtually delivered program that might be in the format of, say, the MOOCs versus currently available delivery formats, how might those be viewed as different? Or would they just be viewed the same? And why would the mounting of MOOCs pose any questions around the currently existing accredited initiatives already?
Well, thank you. Actually, the model we have at the African Virtual University is that the programs are being offered in partnership with partners in each country, and the program are being accredited through the partners in the country. That's the model that was used several years ago. In terms of online program accreditation, I think it's much better these days, but most of these national regulatory bodies don't have a framework for that. But more and more of them now have framework and can actually access open distance and e-learning courses. The reason why we're changing our method is that we believe that if ABU as an organization could really help, is that we offer the programs directly to multiple countries. It's very complex. And in the event of MOOCs, we don't see MOOCs very differently. You don't need a framework for MOOCs. You need a framework, qualification framework for open distance and e-learning, and MOOCs will be in that. But they will be asking the same questions. the quality of the learners, the quality of the program, student supports, and if you want to have 1,000 of students, you better have a special answer to that. Right, thank you.
Thanks. Up in the back.
Hi, thank you all of the panelists, also the moderator. I'm from University of Pennsylvania Graduate School Education. My question is that I think all of the panelists emphasize that the massive MOOCs or massive courses should be contextualized or learner-centered. So in your opinion, how does the current technology ensure both massive and also contextualized and learner-centered? Thank you.
Open question for any panelists?
Well, I think the capacity or the digital technologies is it allows a large amount of information, so it can reach large populations of students. But that does not necessarily prevent you from designing programs that are relevant to the needs of a specific group. I don't think the two are really exclusive. Many corporate universities design specific programs and they're offering e-learning programs. They are tailor-made to specific needs of a group of people in those corporations. But they address the needs of similar groups of people specializing in similar subject areas anywhere else. So I don't think that there is that the two are necessarily exclusive.
To that, I totally agree. I would add that another area of opportunity is in the collective learning experience that the blend, no matter where, allows the the blended education people can enjoy. That could be generated by an online platform itself, which allows the users to meet, to face-to-face, to meet online, which is not as great as face-to-face, but it's certainly conducive to degrees of collaboration. And that in turn would also help understand what is the kind of technology, what is the the right duration of courses, what are the very specific aspects of the offering that are tailor-made to each specific community. But it's a bit of a chicken and an egg. Sometimes there are things that you can definitely understand up front because they have to do with some elements of vocational training which are general everywhere, but sometimes until you go through it, you really don't know.
Would it be fair to say that there's already a considerable body of information that already is known about the needs of the users in the communities in which we seek to focus our attention?
Yeah. Well, to go back to the question, I think that for me, I'm an advocate, a strong advocate of student-centered approaches based on constructivism and socio-constructivism. Whereas I'm designing my course for a classroom of 20 people or online for 1,000 people, I think that there is no question that that would be my choice and the way I would prefer to do.
In my view, what still happens is that there is a very strong expression of need for education, but that expression of need for education doesn't necessarily come through a request for education. It comes for a discontent, rebellion, springs, and so on, because a lot of the freedom boils down to education. At the same time, a lot of these needs are somehow described by those who are then providing the education, which I think is in good faith. There is nothing wrong with that. I just believe that there is still a lot to test and a lot to learn, and the more data it becomes available in the next few years, not just about the segmentation of users from which parts of the world and so on, but really what they've got out of these courses, that's where things will really become fascinating.
Okay, any other questions on the floor? Yes, please.
Yeah, Rory McGrail at the Basque University, Canada. It follows from the previous question is, what kind of pedagogy is embedded in it? And my response to that is there's none, it's up to you. And in distance learning, there is a huge literature on what to do and how to do it that has been ignored in traditional universities. And we keep talking about quality in our programs, and we don't hear the same thing in traditional universities, where the basic plan is you take a PhD and you put them in a classroom. And there's no pedagogy, there's no understanding of the technology. And this idea of learner-centered, constructivism, connectivism, these are all part of the distance education research that is being done. And what I would like to ask you is, you see, and we do see it in Canada now, is that this research in online learning is going back to the classroom. And they are actually improving their classroom teaching for the first time, and that there are many professors who are focusing on pedagogical issues and technological connections. And so I'd like to ask you is, do you see that happening in your jurisdiction? Because we do definitely see it in Canada.
Thank you very much for that question.
I think you're asking if that is happening in the jurisdiction of an African country. Okay, so.
Well, thank you. I think one of the major issues you have in higher education is that you go through a classroom because you have your PhD to teach, but you don't have pedagogy, you don't know pedagogy, you just do what you think is right. I was educated, I did my PhD in Canada, and I remember that there was a very strong institution on university pedagogy, And I contributed to train actually some of the professors in use of ICT in education through that. In Africa, in my network, I think that people are aware about it. Some of the universities are trying to set up centers for university pedagogies, but I think it will take maybe some time before we see what is happening in Canada. Right. Thank you.
Well, our own experience was that, in fact, because our university became the largest producer of educational material in multimedia format, that there was clearly an impact on the conventional universities in improving the quality of conventional universities. It became a common knowledge that the teachers, professors in conventional universities were actually not only contributing to the development of the material because of our distributed approach to materials development, but there were professors in conventional universities found that material really very handy, very useful. In fact, there was yet another benefit of that large number of people who appear in competitive exams. There are hundreds of thousands of people who appear in competitive exams in India. And it became a commodity really sought after because they found that material much more easy to understand, presented in an interactive manner, and that they would buy in large numbers to study that material to appear in the competitive exam. So that goes to establish what Rory was just mentioning, that because of the pedagogic, the thoroughness or the rigidity with which these materials are developed, reviewed, and quality assurance measures are taken into consideration, that they are better learning materials, in my view.
I just want to add something, Rory. It is that at ABU we have 2 courses. One is for lecturers who are teaching for the first time our programs. The other one is actually a course on integration of ICT in education with the pedagogical aspect in all of that. Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Thanks for raising that question. I think the evidence does indicate that for those who are teachers and professors who teach both on campus and traditional classroom settings, and those who've gone on to take experiences in terms of mounting online education, classrooms and so on and so forth, that the effect has really been felt, that it's enabled teachers and professors to better structure and better understand and better put together their materials, thereby being more learner-centric in the work that they're doing. And I imagine that everywhere in the world, the issue of quality of the teaching is very, that concern is very high all across the world. And so this has an effect, intended or otherwise, that it isn't, that it is actually creating an environment where teachers and instructors are actually making improvements in the overall quality of the learning experience for all. I'm aware of the time. I want to wrap up this session because, as Dan had mentioned in his opening remarks, that the opportunity to network and to socialize and to meet one another is one of our goals for this particular conference. And though we don't give you a whole lot of time for that, there is 15 minutes allocated for something called a coffee break, so I want to respect that. So in closing, innovation, as Professor Khan said, is generally a positive contribution to society. We're at the cusp of a continuity of many, many innovations to come in this whole area of how MOOCs can be better and better used and leveraged and developed for the sake of resource-poor communities and their members and learners. Thank you very much to all of the panelists for the time that you spent in preparing